Mission drift. It's sneaky. It's sneaky because it can disguise itself in so many different ways. It's easy for your church to feel like it's on mission when you're busy, but unfortunately, that's just not always the case. Now, we've talked about mission drift before, but today I'm going to give you a few specific things to look out for so that instead of mission drift sneaking up on you, you can sneak up on it. So stick around because the Church Helper podcast starts right now. Well, hey there, and welcome to another edition of the Church Helper podcast. Our mission here at Church Helper is to help churches make every decision on purpose. My name is Mike, and I'm excited to help you and your church today. So let's just get into it. Getting off mission isn't something that any church wants, and that's why we always need to be keeping an eye out for it. Drifting from our mission often happens when churches choose methods over mission or when your individual ministries aren't always working well together. And that second one, having your ministries all sort of pull in different directions, that can definitely cause some problems. But fear not, much like bringing the car to the mechanic or going to your doctor, diagnosing mission drift isn't really that hard to do as long as you understand the symptoms and you know where to look. So with that in mind, I've today created 3 categories that symptoms usually fall under. Now this list isn't exhaustive, but if your church is experiencing any of these symptoms, it could have at least a mild case of mission drift. Now, one more thing before we start. It's important when reading this list to think of these symptoms as persistent. Everybody has a bad staff meeting or a decision goes sideways every once in a while. But if some of the things on this list that I'm talking about today are regular, consistent, never-ending problems, you should probably think about how those things are linked to your church's mission and that you might be drifting a little bit. So let's get started. Category 1, personnel symptoms. Now, not personal symptoms like you've got a headache, although mission drift can have that effect too. I'm talking about personnel symptoms like you've got a problem with some of the people at your church. Now, no church is perfect because the church isn't made up of perfect people. Every church is made up of imperfect people trying to chase after Jesus. But with that said, some churches seem to have more personnel problems than others, and they don't understand why. So with that in mind, here's a short list of personnel problems that could be caused by mission drift. A slow and steady drop in engagement, however you measure that. A high staff turnover. Personal preferences always getting in the way of decision making. Getting burnt out on things that you're not sure are your job. Having unclear expectations for your staff and elders, and regularly having your staff or volunteers say things like, "I'm not sure what I'm doing here." Now, your congregation's size and age need to be accounted for when answering these questions, but as a rule, if you're dealing with one or more of these issues regularly, you're likely drifting from your mission at least a bit. Now, each one of these categories could be and might eventually be a podcast on their own. But for now, it's crucial to just be able to identify areas that you might be having a problem. So maybe when you're done with this podcast today, you should take some time to think critically through a few of these areas that I just mentioned. See if you can start linking personnel problems with a lack of understanding or commitment to your church's mission. That's a great place to start. And if you're still not sure what to do next, put something in the comments or contact us and we'll be happy to talk you through it. We'll do our best to help you out all the time because we want to help you make every decision on purpose. Category 2, ministry symptoms. Now those are going to be the problems that manifest themselves in your ministries. Again, on a regular basis, things that never seem to go away. Every ministry has its challenges and things that need to be adjusted or repaired. But if you're dealing with the following things over and over and over, you likely have a little bit of mission drift in your ministries. This list includes having the same conversation with staff or volunteers all the time, a lack of understanding or buy-in from your ministry leaders, people serving in a ministry area saying things like, "I don't understand why we're doing this," people arriving to meetings without knowing what they're about, key leaders in your church that don't know your mission or your vision statements, having unclear expectations or measurements of success. So here's a quick story about how a volunteer sort of lost way in their mission and how it affected them at the church. So I was talking to a youth pastor one day about one of his volunteers. His church youth program, it averaged about 25 students and 8 leaders per week, and it ran pretty smoothly. And when he first started the job, he said there was this one youth leader that rarely showed up to their midweek program. Now, all the kids and all the leaders loved this particular volunteer, but most of them didn't really expect him to ever sort of be there. Now, eventually, the youth pastor identified the reason, and it wasn't because the volunteer wasn't interested or because he was too busy. It was because he didn't really feel like he was making an impact. The volunteer had a great time when he was there, but he didn't feel like he was making a difference, so he didn't put it as a priority on his calendar. A few months later, the youth pastor assigned that volunteer to be a small group leader, and he provided him with a clear mission. He said, I want you to build relationships and trust with your small group so that when you teach them about Jesus, they listen. And providing that volunteer with a clear mission and a purpose was all he needed to turn his commitment level around. And what's more, now this volunteer doesn't feel bad when he's out of the loop on planning games or knowing the latest gossip, because he knows his job, his mission is to care for the guys in his small group. He knows what he's supposed to be doing, and he does it very well. He's committed to it. Now, I checked in recently, and as of now, that volunteer rarely misses a week of their youth program, and he regularly connects with a small group guys throughout the week. Now, even if he works late or he doesn't have time for dinner, this volunteer still rolls in for youth, and he's got tons of energy, and he's really excited, and he's willing to lead. Now, this youth pastor's problem wasn't a disengaged volunteer. It was a lack of mission clarity. Once the volunteer knew why he was there and why he was necessary, there was total buy-in and everybody benefited. Now, why is this story important? Well, because if your church can't articulate to its staff or its volunteers why they're doing what they're doing, you're likely drifting from your mission a little bit. In my story, the ministry had drifted away from its mission just a little bit, and it had a negative effect on the volunteers' engagement. But correcting that was really simple. The youth pastor just needed to understand the church's mission and articulate it to those whom he was leading. So ask yourself this: do your volunteers know why what they're doing is important? Do they understand how it relates to the overall mission of the church? An action step here is easy. At the end of this podcast, go and ask somebody, hey, do you know why you're doing what you're doing here at the church? And then be open to whatever answer you get and carry the conversation from there. Category 3, financial symptoms. Now, we live in a time where a lot of churches are in financial trouble. The CBC recently reported that in Canada, close to 9,000 churches would close over the next 10 years. And I talk to churches about this all the time. Many of them are struggling with increasing or out-of-reach expenses and decreased revenue. So the translation on that is a lot of churches are having money problems. But what if we changed our perspective on money problems? What if, instead of looking at a spreadsheet and saying, we have a money problem, we looked at that same spreadsheet and said, we have a mission problem? What if you didn't look at money as a problem, but you looked at money as a symptom of a bigger problem? In this case, of mission drift. So here's a short list of ways that mission drift might manifest itself into financial issues. A steady drop in financial support from your congregation. People only donating to causes they support or only giving to specific ministries that affect them. Overall spending that isn't proportional to desired outcomes. Regular church members who only tithe when they come to service, like a pay-to-play. Or people who regularly talk about developing revenue streams and rarely talk about making disciples. The reality is that Jesus taught us all about this in Matthew 6 on the Sermon on the Mount. You can't serve both God and money. You can't put your focus on both. It just doesn't work. Financial stewardship in the church is essential, but if you're more concerned about the balance sheet than anything else, you've drifted from your mission. And the most challenging part of this is, if you're starting to feel the financial pinch now, you've likely drifted from your mission quite a while ago. And this is important to realize because usually people try to fix financial problems with financial solutions. And when you're working at a church, that's just one-dimensional and non-missional thinking. Every church budget tells a story not only of money coming in and going out, but of the mission and outreach and ministry priorities at that church. It's easy to look at a line in a budget and cut it because, well, that didn't work. But what's hard is to talk about why it didn't work. That's the mission conversation. As always, if you're a staff member or a volunteer and you're still not sure how to identify mission drift, feel free to reach out to us. We'd be happy to have a chat with you anytime because our goal here, our mission, is to help churches make every decision on purpose. And if you want to take one action step right now, you could head over to our website, churchhelper.ca/tools, and you could access our free mission drift assessment tool. And if there's somebody in your life that you think should hear this podcast, they're not really a podcaster or a YouTuber, we've got you covered. Head over to our website, churchhelper.ca/podcast, to get a printable transcript of today's episode. Thanks so much for watching, listening, or reading the Church Helper podcast. My name's Mike, and I'll talk to you again really soon.